everybody at Press for Truth. My name is Brian, and this is my little blog called BC Freedom. And Dan and I have decided to collaborate a little bit together on getting out to you all the awesome content that you have come to expect from Press for Truth. Today I'm going to do my first screencast, and we are going to cover the fake news topic. Now, obviously, I know that there's hundreds and thousands of articles out there regarding this topic, but what I'm going to do today is cover this from an angle that I'm sure you haven't seen before, and would ask that you keep in mind that this angle basically applies to just about everything out there that is going wrong with our society and industry and governments. Now, I'm sure you're aware of stats and charts and whatnot that carry this information regarding the consolidation of big media out there. And we can see that we have GE and Viacom, Time Warner and their subsidiaries, CNN, all the mainstream main stations that people use. However, when you follow the money, it is imperative on us always to go to the very end of that trail, and that's exactly what we are going to do today. Now, we know that these corporations are huge, but there's also some very large corporations out there and entities that basically actually own these companies as well. And when you start thinking about that, you can get into the pension fund system, more importantly, the global pension fund system, which has assets roughly around $25 trillion, give or take a few trillion, depending on fluctuations. Now, even in the top 300, we're looking at about 15 trillion, and America's number 1 and Canada's around number 5. And we can see that these are some of the reasons why these guys are pushing for control and censorship of news, the internet, papers, and everything else out there, any other vehicle for media and truth out there. And we are going to look at a fund today called the California Public Employees Pension Fund. And as you can see, we have the Canada Pension Fund and some of the other top funds out there. And you'll notice that when you go through those funds, you see all the same names. Some of those names include, obviously, your companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, all the large tech companies that are out there. And what we get to start seeing is that by market cap, these are some of the largest companies out there. Used to be, your Exxons, and everybody knew about that. And you still have your GE, which we talked about earlier, but we have Google and Facebook and a lot of these companies out there. And those are tech companies, and that maybe used to didn't be a big deal. However, now most people are getting their news through these companies, more importantly through these companies' filters of what news they want you to see, which must of course align with what the governments of the time and their ideologies are. Now, the interesting thing is that the majority of these companies don't actually even pay taxes. And there's a reason for that. They are very much, of course, buddy-buddy with the government. And we can see here some of the numbers. This is Statista covering that, as well as we have Bloomberg letting us know some very large numbers out there. Numbers vary here and there, but it is a huge number, that is for sure. And when the government wants an ideology put through, they will use these entities. But also the fact is that the majority of pension funds out there are actually either grossly underfunded or, of course, moving very rapidly towards total insolvency. And this is a topic we'll cover as we move forward. Now, the issue starts to become that these guys don't pay taxes. And part of the reason why is these pension funds are desperate for yields. And of course, in exchange for not paying those taxes, they want to ensure that their message the government wants to get out does in fact get out. We talked about looking into CalPERS, and I made a little graphic here. It's not perfect, but it basically shows you in a nutshell some of these companies that we covered earlier, the Googles, Facebooks, and Viacoms and all that. There's a massive amount of investment in these companies. This is just one pension fund. That's a California one. Since I'm from BC, stationed here now, we have Apple, Google. It's all the same. It's in the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, literally into the trillions, as we discussed. Again, they pay no taxes. Now, part of the situation is the fact that via proxy voting, since these pension funds own such a massive amount of shares in these companies, we always hear the fact that corporations are taking over government. Well, in fact, of course, they all are in sort of the same bed together, but the reality is this. Via these pension funds, these guys exert a massive amount of control on some of the largest companies out there. I mean, you could see some of these names right here. So the reality is that although they're very much together, it's really the government that pushes a lot of these key decisions, and a lot of it is in exchange for the fact that these companies don't have to pay taxes. It is a primary way of influencing a company's operations and corporate governance. Now, when we look at the word government, really, when we go back to the root words of most of our language, it's Latin, and we see that the word itself means to control the mind. Now, people may want to go into other areas, conspiracy theory or whatever. The reality is the fact that the information that goes into your mind is what shapes your mind, shapes your opinion, shapes your thoughts. And since the government always wants to keep control and power, well, knowledge is power. And if you control the knowledge, then you control the power. You get yourself into a position where you retain and keep always, through the line of time, power and control. And that's exactly what's going on. So part of that buddy-buddiness is that we have the White House visits by lobbyists, and we have Google, we have Facebook, we have all the largest companies going in there that you know well, your Exxons and everybody else, and of course the amounts of money that a lot of these companies pay. So a pretty good return on investment if you can give a few $1,000,000 a year here and there and get rid of tens to hundreds of billions of dollars in tax owing. I'd say that's a pretty good job to make that happen. Now, we talked about those corporations, and we saw some of those at the top, and we look at the pension funds and everything else, and the reality is if I asked you a quick question, what is the largest corporation or company, say, in Canada? Some names might come to mind, the Googles and everything else, but the fact is that company, according to the Securities and Exchange Commission website, is in fact Canada itself. And that's the same as the United States, or the province of British Columbia, the state of California, of Texas, of Florida, all those other things. It is really they who are at the top of the food chain. Now, what's basically been happening is for the longest time, sort of up to the internet happened, and even a little while after that really kind of got going, these guys had a monopoly on everything. So the analogy I like to use is maybe a town where they have a dentist, a carpenter, or a mechanic, and these guys had a monopoly. So there was really no reason for them to have to be good, to be honest, to tell the truth and establish confidence in their word. But now things have changed, and the internet has come around, and what happened is these alternative media sites started to come out. And why did they happen? They don't just come out of nowhere. They came from the fact that the people who started those sites were tired of being lied to, and perhaps there was a market, because there's always a market for truth. People do want to know the truth. And when these people started presenting the truth, and it was fact-checked, and it was shown to be real over time versus a lot of the mainstream media stuff, which is always proven to be a lie, this is where people started to send their clicks, send their dollars, send their eyeballs, really, onto these sites. And now what's happened is the government's saying, hey, wait a minute, people aren't buying the lie anymore. People are going to other sites. So what they do in typical government fashion is try to destroy the free market. And they will get these companies to do a lot of things. We see the confidence and trust in the government and the media are at all-time lows. Well, if you lie to people forever, they are going to stop trusting you. That's just kind of how things work. We've seen some of these numbers even in the last little while. And they have a war on free press. Now, typically when you're doing a war, you want to censor or shadow ban or outright distort reality. Like you would do in a physical war, you want to cut off the supplies, the electricity, the water, and all these other things. So you start coming into things like the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act, which of course the masters of propaganda are these intelligence agencies as well as the government itself, ensuring that their line and ideology and what they want to accomplish always goes through, which typically is more taxes, less rights, and all these things that you've come to know. And we've seen, even here at Press for Truth, a lot of playing around with Facebook, followers and likes, dropping, posts way down to the bottom of people's feeds, or just not putting it up altogether, shadow banning. And of course, talking about things that aren't even real. A lot of this Russian hacking stuff or distorting the reality altogether as to what's actually happening. So we obviously know that when you follow the money and you look at these things, this is basically what is happening. Even Napoleon said way back in the day, the hostile newspapers are more to be feared than 1,000 bayonets. Well, we're in the same spot, folks. We're having the media, the mainstream, lining us up for wars with countries that didn't really do anything or want to start these wars because there's a huge amount of profitability. You go back through those pension plans and you will see one thing, the massive amount of investments in companies that produce weapons and destructive things, when of course they should be investing in everything else besides that. So if you really want to get to the bottom of things, that's where you got to look. You got to look where all the money is. And if we really want to enact some change out there, there's some things like Steemit and Patreon out there where if you're a blogger, you can start putting some of the stuff out there. And if you're a fan of the free market, this is your place to go. This is where you can vote and say what information you want to see and what you want to have happen. And actually, it's kind of cool because the people who are trying to get this information out to you obviously can be supported in a lot of capacities. So you can learn about those things. You can become a patron on Patreon and support the people that are trying to get this data out to you. You know, obviously following the blogs and checking out the sites and getting this information out to everybody, and stop, you know, getting the paper subscriptions to these mainstream media and whatnot that are all lying to you. The whole game is based on lies. And if there's buyers, there's always going to be liars. So we got to stop buying this stuff. And I know a lot of people are moving in that direction, and that's fantastic. And if we keep going, maybe it's going to get to the point where the truth prevails, because if 95% of the people that are putting out information are putting out things that are lies, well, then there's a huge market for truth. And that's all that's happened here, folks. So thanks so much for listening to this one. I'm looking forward to getting out a ton of data and information out for you. Always check out Press for Truth, of course, and I got my little blog here, and we're just happy to get this stuff out for you. And if you got any other issues, you know, you just got to look into those pension funds, and whether that's a huge fund like CalPERS or you're just your local state or municipal fund, you'll see down to the tiniest newspaper and down to the tiniest municipality, they are all investing the same way. So thanks very much for your time, and we look forward to providing you more information on this subject and many others at Press for Truth.